Mr. Sandberg, thanks for coming to performance review. No problem. So you're in charge around here, is that fair to say? Absolutely. I'm the boss. Okay, so take us through a day in the life of the boss. Well, the first thing I do is talk to corporate, approve memos, lead a workshop, remember birthdays.
When I look out my window, many sights to see. When I look in my window, so many different people to be, that it's strange, so strange. You got to pick up every stitch. You got to pick up every stitch. You got to pick up every stitch. Must be the season of the witch. Must be the season of the witch. Oh, must be the season of the witch.
Okay, so... Okay, I'm going to deliberately bury the lead on this one, if you will consent to it, to
What's
the burial of said lead. I am decisively taking my golden shovel and I am burying the lead as we speak. I'm burying it some more. I'm digging up the grave. It's a very deep grave to bury said lead. Stalling.
All the stalling in the world, yes.
Who Framed Roger Rabbit was a 1988 feature-length film produced by Steven Spielberg, directed by Robert Zemeckis of then Back to the Future fame, and also directed by animator legend Richard Williams. He specifically directed the animated portions of it. It was loosely based on the Gary Wolfe's novel Who Censored Roger Rabbit. It came together as a passion project by Spielberg, who somehow managed to convince several companies, including Disney, Warner Bros., to lend their characters and cohabit into the same cinematic universe. It was something that was never done or attempted up until that point. It was new, it was interesting, it was glorious, and the end result was so much better than anybody could have possibly predicted. It was a triumph, a prodigy of technique, of animation, of cinematography, and it had a truly involved story that had something meaningful to say about society, racism, and capitalism.
Yeah.
Chip and Dale Rescue Rangers was a 2022 Disney Plus original film that came together as a passion project by Lonely Island team comedians John Mulaney and Andy Samberg. It exists.
Yes, it exists. Much to people's dismay or surprise, depending on who you ask.
I bring up Who Framed Roger Rabbit because, in many ways, in basically all the ways, this quote-unquote reboot, except not really a reboot, more of a sequel, except not really a sequel, this weirdly esoteric entity that we had decided to brand as Rescue Rangers, is not in fact a remake of the classic TV show Chip and Dale Rescue Rangers, which in itself was a reboot for the classic Disney characters of Chip and Dale, which had existed since the 1940s. It is more akin to a sequel or a spin-off to Who Framed Roger Rabbit, in the sense that it very much takes place in the same fictional universe, the universe in which both humans and cartoons live together, exist at the same time in reality. It is an association that this film goes out of its way to make by having the actual Roger Rabbit cameoing.
Cameo. I could say camo. No,
Having a cameo.
Yeah, cameo.
Having a cameo in Rescue Rangers. It is the first time since Who Framed Roger Rabbit when you can find Disney characters along with characters from many more companies and TV shows and films and media and everything in between, inhabiting the same fictional world. When Roger Rabbit did it in 1988, it was something that was never seen before. When Rescue Rangers does it in 2022, we already live in a post-Ready Player One, post-Marvel Cinematic Universe, post-Space Jam reboot, post-everything is a crossover Hollywood. So it doesn't really feel as special anymore. Rather, the appeal of a crossover has been commodified by Hollywood. It preys on your nostalgia by selling you back your nostalgia. And if you recall, that is the incipit to my nihilistic rant about Space Jam: A New Legacy, which I am not going to repeat here. I have made my point abundantly clear about what I think about this entire practice last time, and I do not want to do this again to myself because it just sends me into a state of ennui. And speaking of states of ennui, the truth is that I don't even have that much to say about Rescue Rangers. Don't have much to say about Rescue Rangers in general, not even the original cartoon. I don't have much in terms of nostalgia for it, and even if I had, I am too fed up with this world of Hollywood rebooting, remaking, and crossovering that I do not feel the magic anymore. I am filled with cynicism because this entire practice smells openly, brazenly of cynicism.
Yeah.
But let me proceed by degree, see if I can actually extract a proper discussion out of this mess.
Let's try that then.
I'm going to be forced to go back and forth between Roger Rabbit and Rescue Rangers because, once again, I remind you, it's a comparison that Chip and Dale Rescue Rangers wants to have, goes out of its way to have. Rescue Rangers is... what if Chip and Dale were actors in the original cartoon, The Rescue Rangers, and it's been 30-odd years since then, and now they are washed-up actors. They live in our world because, or rather, they live in the world, the fictional world of Roger Rabbit. Basically, Rescue Rangers was a TV show in the fictional world of Roger Rabbit, where humans and cartoons live together, so of course Chip and Dale are also there.
So it's behind the cartoon, essentially.
So, Rescue Rangers, in spite of it being called Rescue Rangers, is a spin-off to Roger Rabbit that stars Chip and Dale, which were Rescue Rangers within the canon of the universe. Are you with me so far?
I've always been with you. I've seen the trailer and I've definitely seen a few things about it, so
it is the case in which the branding of it says something. The trailer and every information that's made publicly available about it before its release says otherwise. So it is effectively a reboot that's branded as a reboot, except it's not a reboot and it's not even a comeback, as the tagline suggests. It is supposedly a film that makes fun of the concept of reboots, which, by the way, very original, Hollywood. I've never seen that done before, except it doesn't even do that.
Yep.
I'm getting to it. There is a lot to cover, and yet at the same time, nothing at all. Basically, Chip and Dale, they had their show. They apparently are not friends anymore, and Dale had his CGI surgery, which means he is now CGI for no reason other than, haha, funny joke.
Yep.
Except that Chip is also CGI, and every other character is CGI. Cel-shaded CGI with less frames per second. But we, as members of the audience, are supposed to think that is 2D animated.
Yep.
Their friend, Monterey Jack, from the original cartoon, gets kidnapped by bad guys because he had a debt which was related to his cheese addiction. So they decide to be the Rescue Rangers or something and go track him down. And there's Peter Pan, who's older and fatter and meaner. More on that later. And things happen, and somehow we feel about 90 minutes of this, and then it ends, and I proceed to forget about it, as you can see.
Yes, I can see that you forgot about a lot of it.
Let me go back to Who Framed Roger Rabbit.
Okie dokie.
Like I said, it was a phenomenal enterprise, a great artistic achievement. The technique to mix up live-action actors with animated cartoons in the same frame, in the same scene, has existed since the late 1910s. But it has never been done quite well. There was always that issue deriving from the interaction or lack thereof between the two parties. You could never quite believe, as a member of the audience, that that cartoon and that person made of meat were actually interacting and talking to each other in the same scene. There are many famous issues related to the practice. For example, the actor doesn't look the cartoon character in the eyes because it's not really there.
Yeah.
And the cartoon character does not actually feel like it's part of the world, of the setting, because there are no shadows, shades, any sort of light reflecting upon the character. Who Framed Roger Rabbit famously managed to do everything that something like, Song of the South, to name a random one, was not able to do. They managed to have characters feel like they are there, interacting with each other. They leave a mark in the world they inhabit. Light and shadows reflect upon them, and the fleshy actors took mime lessons to learn to focalize to a point in the scene, to make them learn how to pretend that there is an actual person in front of them, even when there is not.
Yeah.
And that's why every scene between Bob Hoskins' character, Eddie Valiant, and Roger Rabbit is so good and effective, because Bob is actually looking Roger in the eyes, even if Roger is not really there outside of the film magic. Now, conversely, the animation techniques have advanced a lot since 1988. So you would think that a modern Roger Rabbit film, like a Roger Rabbit-like, would look great, but that's not quite the case. For reasons both intentional and unintentional, Rescue Rangers is technically well animated, technically expensive. I mentioned earlier how Dale has had in-universe a CGI surgery. That's how you justify that in-universe, the existence of CGI. They get a surgery. There is a cameo by Baloo from the Jungle Book reboot. That's a photorealistic CGI. There is even a Pumbaa cameo, the Lion King remake, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But it would make sense that it's there, because times have changed, and that really underlines how much times have changed, for better and decisively for worse. In that optic, in that context, it makes perfect sense that Dale's CGI model is slightly off and off-putting. His big red nose has nostrils, for crying out loud. It looks weird, but not in an obvious way, in an uncanny way.
Yeah.
The joke, or the commentary, if you will, CGI models, am I right? Traditional animation was better because nostalgia and all of that. So clearly it's supposed to look bad, and especially off when you put it beside Chip, whom has remained a traditionally animated character. Except not really, because as I mentioned before, Chip is also CG animated, except cel-shaded and with less frames per second. They did an enormous job to make this CGI model look somewhat traditionally animated in a manner that emulates that style. But it's still off-putting because it's very much CGI still. The modern techniques used for this film, instead of complementing the diegesis, the characters, and the potential theming of it all, they drive a barrier between them. We are shown a flashback to the 1980s. The 1980s, where Chip and Dale were both 2D cartoon characters, except they are not 2D cartoon characters, they are 3D but cel-shaded! In the world of Roger Rabbit, the techniques used for the animation were just as important to the storytelling as the writing. That elevates the diegesis into a proper, heartfelt, nostalgic homage to old school animation, which is exactly what Roger Rabbit was supposed to be. A celebration, a nostalgic celebration of cartoons for the Steven Spielberg's generation. That was also a way to reintroduce them to newer generations. So Roger Rabbit was already, in its day, a product of nostalgia. But, again, it being from 1988, it was before Hollywood had taken that nostalgia and turned it into a product to sell. The one thing that everybody takes from that film, the one element that everybody copies from Roger Rabbit without really understanding what actually works brilliantly from Roger Rabbit, is all the references and cameos. If you put references and cameos in your film, that's a substitute for actual substance. Furthermore,
Right.
it sounds like I'm being pedantic, but you need to keep in mind that Rescue Rangers, by design, is a film that constantly breaks the fourth wall to poke fun at reboots, the concept of rebooting and remaking and traditional animation versus modern CGI animation. There is a stupid joke about cartoons rapping. Everybody does that and it's lame every time. And of course both Chip and Dale do rap at some point. And it's a very dumb song, but haha, you're supposed to laugh at it because unlike all the other times in which characters start rapping for absolutely no reason, these two are aware that it's silly, so it's automatically hilarious.
So, what you're saying is that Rescue Rangers is technically a knockoff of Roger Rabbit. That's what I'm kind of hearing.
It has Roger Rabbit in it for a gratuitous 3 seconds cameo, which again, I pointed out, it's ironic because Who Framed Roger Rabbit initially was a product of nostalgia in its own way, so now the avatar for the nostalgia becomes nostalgic himself.
Sounds kind of ironic.
I'm trying to wrap my head around this concept. Why? Why was this even imagined? They could have done a normal reboot. They could have done a normal remake, but no, they had to make a quote-unquote postmodern reimagining BoJack Horseman-y version of Chip and Dale, in which they are two former actors and their show existed in the fictional world of the film, which is in itself a spin-off or sequel to Who Framed Roger Rabbit, because it clearly wants to be that too. And again, for a film so bent out of shape in breaking the fourth wall, making meta jokes, meta references, from the redesign change of Sonic the Hedgehog to dumb trends in Hollywood branding, to Uncanny Valley CGI characters from the mid-2000s, to this and that other thing, to everything in between. For all the little things and elements that it likes to lightly poke for the sake of an unfunny joke, it baffles me that they had absolutely nothing to say, that they completely ignored the fact that Chip is not traditionally animated, he is CG animated, but cel-shaded.
Yeah.
Do you see where I'm coming from with this?
I do, and honestly, I remember, like I said before the trailer, when the trailer was out, I remember being put off by it just because it seemed like a cooking pot that had no direction and no cohesion to it. So basically everything clashes.
I don't have a problem with everything clashing, especially when the film makes it a point to be clashing on purpose. And on that note, I've seen that clash of different styles done right in The Amazing World of Gumball, by the way. They are stylistically different and it's part of the joke. But the joke only goes so far. And the reason why it doesn't work is because it was not a true clash of styles. Because, again, Chip is not traditionally animated as he was supposed to be.
Well, of course not, because, easier to CGI, right?
No, it's not easier. That's the thing, because they took a CGI model, they cel-shaded it, as I said already a couple of million times, and they had to manually alter the frame rate in order to emulate the pen-to-paper 24 frames per second style of traditional animation that it's supposed to represent.
Yeah.
And the work is a lot more time-consuming than just doing a CGI model like Dale. And that's the irony. And it's an irony that I am spotting and nobody within the film has bothered to. For a film so predicated on meta-humor, it's just such a missed opportunity. But honestly, that's one of the minor critiques I have about this film. Another minor critique is that apparently, while the world in the film acknowledges that the TV show Rescue Rangers was something that existed and was popular in 1990, it also simultaneously, somehow, for some reason, reboots, that's right, actually reboots the Chip and Dale origin story by completely erasing the fact that they existed in the 1940s. Instead, according to this alternative universe fanfiction storyline, they were kids in the 80s and they went to school together. As an animation historian, I find this preposterous and offensive. I will once again, one final time, reiterate that I am being pedantic about this.
Yeah.
Because the film is entirely predicated on meta-humor. It's a parody of reboots, while also being itself a reboot that reboots Chip and Dale's origin story. To make it fit for the reboot that was Rescue Rangers, which is a reboot happening in real life within the fictional universe, that is this Rescue Rangers branded film, which is really a sequel and spin-off to Framed Roger Rabbit. Can you tell that I am struggling to find anything to say about Rescue Rangers? I am focusing on the trees and missing the forest. That's because the forest itself is a bit of a dump. And it's on fire as we speak.
And here I thought you were going to say the forest is not much of a forest at all. It's just a single
Well-
row of trees.
Well, there won't be much of a forest left after the fire, obviously. I'm going to go back to Who Framed Roger Rabbit. First of all, Roger Rabbit had a lot of cameos. Cameos that indeed made you, a member of the audience, go, "Oh, I know that character. I feel nostalgic about this." Which is fine to do when it's the first time you do something like that ever in 1988.
Yeah.
But one thing that Roger Rabbit didn't do was clutter his running time with references to other films. When you see Donald Duck and Daffy Duck having a piano duel, you've never seen that before, and you will most likely never see that ever again outside of fanfiction.
Yeah.
It's new. And that's really what originality is. Nothing is truly original. Everything is derivative. So true creativity comes from taking what's already been invented and use it in newer ways. Find new directions for it.
Yeah.
Both Donald and Daffy already existed. Everybody knows them. Nobody has ever seen them in an actual film in theaters occupying the same frame. And speaking of accuracy, the film is set in 1947. So the Daffy Duck you see in the film is not the post-Chuck Jones grumpy greedy Daffy Duck that was most popular. It is the original Daffy Duck, how he was in the 1940s. And it could have been easy to have the wrong Daffy Duck in 1947, but they didn't do it because they cared about the details. They cared about all the characters in the film looking time era appropriate, the way they are designed, the way they are animated. Rescue Rangers does not care about that level of details, as I've already ranted aplenty.
Yeah.
But back on the topic, the world in Who Framed Roger Rabbit feels lived in. That's because you have characters inhabiting it, not just appearing in it for a quick cameo. They are presented as having their own agencies, they are background characters, living their own lives, getting by in this twisted, cruel, racist world. Eddie Valiant, the character played by Bob Hoskins, looks at them, interacts with them. As the plot progresses, the world is built along the way. And because of that, the cameos from the famous characters, they get to feel more special. Because you know, as a member of the audience, that they inhabit this world. They don't just appear in it as if it were some sort of anti-drugs PSA like, I don't know, Cartoon All-Stars, for no reason. They are people that live in the world. The main character gets to interact with them. It is not a reference-driven narrative. It is a narrative-driven narrative that has cameos in it.
Yeah, that just so happened to basically pass by the plot, essentially.
It's an organic use of your cameos for the benefit of the diegesis. Not because they have to sell you your own nostalgia back to you. It is a difference in philosophy that changes everything. It is the difference between a passion project and corporate cynicism. The plot in Who Framed Roger Rabbit actually had some teeth to it. It is set in Los Angeles in 1947, and there is a reason for that, a specific reason. That's because the film comments about the real-life privatization and then dismantling of the public transport infrastructure in the city of Los Angeles, and how that impacted minority groups and entire districts. The goal of the villain, Judge Doom, played to perfection by Christopher Lloyd, was to buy out all the public transport, dismantle it, and then destroy Toontown in order to build the highway, which in turn would have led to the real-life happenings of Los Angeles, in which it became one of the most traffic-infested cities in the world. The inherent subtext of the plot in Who Framed Roger Rabbit is also about racism, because the cartoons are akin to an exploited and persecuted minority. Exploited by Hollywood, Dumbo gets paid in literal nuts, by the way. Yes, and it gets persecuted by the cops. Judge Doom is a cop that kills cartoons with the dip. And I will always have that scene of the dying cartoon shoe within the dip. It's nightmarish. But that's because Who Framed Roger Rabbit had something legitimate, something meaningful and extemporaneous to say about capitalism, racism, and society. The plot of Rescue Rangers is about bootlegging.
Yes, hence what I brought up earlier.
It's about bootlegging. So you might be thinking to yourself, since this meta-comedy makes a big fuss about bootlegs, you would think that the film is about having a legitimate discussion about why bootlegs happen, condemning maybe how Hollywood uses your nostalgia to fuel its own machine, its incessant number of factory-made, corporate-approved reboots and remakes to inundate your media-consuming experience. Does it make some sort of commentary about uncritically consuming media? Does it say anything even tangentially related to that? No, not really, no. It sounds like it might take that direction, but it chooses to ignore the themes that it actually sets up in the first act to focus on bootlegging and how it's bad, because Disney doesn't like it when you infringe on their copyright.
Bootlegs are bad, okay?
They hate it so much, in fact, they hate when people infringe on their copyright so much that the film's own analogy to bootlegging, to the practice of bootlegging, is human trafficking.
Yep.
Cartoons are kidnapped.
Mouths erased.
Mouths erased with an eraser, which again makes no sense
Because these are actually CG animated cartoons, only so shaded so
you cannot erase their mouths with an eraser. They would have to be drawn on paper. You cannot do that. The joke doesn't work because they are not traditionally animated. Okay? The joke doesn't work. I would have accepted it if they were animated frame by frame on some computer program. I would have accepted it. But they are not even that. They are CG models with less frame rates. They are CG models with a 2D coating on them. You cannot... Anyway, so cartoons get kidnapped, their bodies get rearranged with invasive surgery, and they are forced to film bootleg versions of Disney classics. So the message of the film boils down entirely on bootleg is bad, and according to Disney, it is so bad it's akin to torturing and defacing your beloved classic characters. Oh, but when Disney does it, it's okay, because then they can make money off of it.
Yeah, keep in mind that basically while commentating about bootlegging, they had to bootleg Ugly Sonic just to skirt around copyright.
What's really hilarious about Rescue Rangers is that for a film that's so self-aware It is not self-aware at all when it matters the most. It is the least self-aware film I've ever seen. It is basically the most openly brazen corporate propaganda you could possibly pass as a not reboot of anything. All of that setup about reboots, which is how the film was advertised to be about. The trailer itself suggests so, ends up not being as relevant at all to what the actual plot is. There is no point made whatsoever, any point of significance made about reboot in either direction. It is simply dropped in order for some corporate executive to come into your house, bust down the door, and yell into your face, "Don't infringe on our copyright! How dare you affect our bottom line!" Oh, you poor $1 trillion company. They truly are the underdog. On the other hand, those nasty, dastardly, random people on the streets selling bootleg DVDs, those are the real evil. That's everything that's wrong in America. What's this about Florida? I don't know. And then there's the villain of the piece, which I mentioned before. It is, in fact, Peter Pan, except older, fatter, meaner, which, again, in the context of the universe, doesn't really make any sense because cartoons do not age.
They don't age!
At least after a certain point, Chip looks the same as he was 30 years ago. Gadget looks the same as she was 30 years ago. They're all the same. The only reason why Peter Pan had to age was because a very specific comparison to a real-life tragedy, which they had to know happened. They had to. It's too much of a specific choice.
Right. I still need to take a look on this myself. I only caught the back end of it from people who actually watched the film. Peter Pan was basically a movie many years ago. Was it the 1940s? I forget.
1950s.
So it was a 1950s film.
A Disney cartoon.
And the voice actor who played Peter Pan, life was not very easy for him after that film. Let's put it that way. And a lot of people thought it was pretty tasteless of Rescue Rangers to basically do such a thing.
The actor who played Peter Pan was a child celebrity. And we all know how most child celebrities wound up once they hit puberty. The industry picks them up, chew them, and then spits them out once they are no longer charmingly childish enough to sell tickets. That's exactly what happened to the Peter Pan actor. He was exploited as a child, and then as soon as he hit puberty, he was kicked out, and he was never quite able to recover psychologically. He tragically died at the age of 31 because of all the issues that came with the traumatic experience. He was never able to recover. The Rescue Rangers people decided it would be a great idea to take this character, which was effectively ruined by Disney, turned him into the villain who makes bootlegs and is therefore the enemy of Disney. They had to know this. Again, it's too specific of a choice. If the idea here was to establish a connection between the villain and the protagonists in that they are has-been actors, essentially two sides of the same coin and whatnot, if the point was to draw that comparison, they didn't need to use Peter Pan. They didn't need to actually use the real-life backstory of the Peter Pan actor as the backstory for this Peter Pan, which they did, by the way. This backstory, this character, doesn't really amount to anything thematically, because as I said before, the film doesn't really bother to make a point about reboots or nostalgia. Corporations ruin your childhood, in some cases literally. It doesn't make a point about any of that. Which means that every choice regarding this character was entirely gratuitous. They could have just used the real-life Will Arnett, BoJack Horseman himself, Will Arnett, whom, by the way, does voice Peter Pan here. They could have just used him as himself, as the live-action actor. No need to play the cartoon character. That would have been fine. Here's an even better idea. They could have used Fat Cat, the actual #1 villain in the Rescue Rangers cartoon, which within the universe of the film was their colleague on the show. And there's your connection to the antagonist. He's a has-been actor whose career dropped when the show was cancelled, but no, they had to use the real-life tragedy of a real-life person for that sweet Peter Pan, look how smart we are reference. So Rescue Rangers is not very good. It's not very good. And listen, even though I went off here with several fits of rage, the truth is that when I watched this film the first time, I felt nothing. I was too bored out of my skull to even being upset at the gross message of the film and the grosser implications of Peter Pan as a character here. I was consumed by apathy. I was drowning in a state of ennui. It was very much the Space Jam New Legacy experience all over again. Slightly less devastating than that. That film absolutely broke my soul.
Yeah.
Now, comedy is subjective, obviously. You might find something that makes you laugh or amuses you about this film. But personally, John Mulaney and Andy Samberg, despite being very funny guys, or so I'm told, could not cobble up together a funny joke to save their lives. Every gag there has been done to death already by so many other films before it and the internet in general. At the end of the day, when it's all said and done, there wasn't really all that much that was said or done in the first place. Culturally vapid, insipid piece of art, the kind that which might get some limelight for about 2 weeks and then afterwards will never be mentioned or talked about ever again. It doesn't really deserve that much scrutiny because it's a big fat waste of time. The only audience for it might be curious onlookers who might want to see how weird this is, and they will be slightly disappointed because it sounds weird on paper. I had quite a time as I attempted to describe it.
Yeah.
But when you get down to it, it is not memorable. It is not interesting. It is a pale imitation of what Roger Rabbit was and could never be again, because that's also the sad truth. You can never make something like Roger Rabbit ever again.
It can never be recaptured.
It can never be recaptured, especially not in a post-Ready Player One, post-Marvel Cinematic Universe planet. We are too ingrained into the media consumerism to truly feel any magic, especially when the proceedings behind this film, as allegedly author-driven as it is, feel so cynical and corporate-approved.
I will say that a lot of people who watch this film, so basically feedback, criticisms and all that, has been that it wasn't funny or they're baffled at why they went in this direction. The biggest one is, from the majority of people, is you might as well have just reboot Rescue Rangers rather than this behind the cartoon style show. Well,
right.
movie.
Right.
It would have been less of a bother It would have had
It would have been less
point.
insulting to fans because it is branded like Chip and Dale Rescue Rangers, but it is not Chip and Dale Rescue Rangers. It is a Roger Rabbit spin-off that nobody wanted to really see.
Also, a lot of people were not happy about Gadget not being used much.
I know for certain that a certain Russian cult was not happy about it. Oh yes, I know about that one.
Oh, I know about that one too, honestly.
Yes, we will not elaborate on it whatsoever.
No, let's not. But just know a lot of fans of Rescue Rangers and people in general were not highly impressed with it or saw much in it. That's basically what you could probably describe as based on both Madhog's experience with it and the experiences I have noted on the internet thus far.
It's nothing. It's a cinematic nothing that occasionally looks pretty because the cinematography is not half bad. I'm going to conclude this long-winded tangent about Rescue Rangers by pointing out a few moments in the film that, for better or for worse, stood out to me.
Yeah?
First of all, a positive note. I do like the world building in this. That's the one element about Roger Rabbit that they managed to capture quite effectively. They had cartoons, characters actually inhabiting the world, not just appearing in it. Background characters, foreground characters having their own agencies, going about their own lives, filling the scene, giving life to the world and the setting. I also deeply appreciate that in the true spirit of Roger Rabbit, as I said before, by the way, they managed to have characters owned by several other companies, not just Disney, thank God, also being there. This is exactly how I would imagine the world of Roger Rabbit in a more contemporary setting. We get to see what Midwestern American looks like in the Roger Rabbit continuity.
Yeah.
In the 1980s, you see a Transformer in a crowd shot. That's nice. That's very nice.
Yeah.
Present day Los Angeles, which is far more BC than it was in 1947. Far more people and cartoons. I also liked some of the poster gags. For example, there is a poster for a film titled Batman vs. E.T. That did get a small, modest chuckle out of me, at the very least. There are nice little moments like that, mostly relegated to the background. Unfortunately, the foreground is extremely obnoxious. Definitely on a more bewildering note, Gadget and Zipper are married.
Oh gosh.
They had 42 children.
Oh gosh.
And we get to see them all.
Oh no.
They did not shy away at all from these little Cronenbergian nightmares. They have shown them all. They are not cowards. On the very specific front of the unrequited shipping between Zipper the Fly and Gadget the Mouse, they were not cowards. They must have done this to piss off the fanbase, specifically. And I almost commend them for doing that. Because if you're going to troll somebody, you might as well do it with class. Okay, that's something.
It was something.
Perhaps the funniest character in the film is a stop-motion claymation police inspector who constantly gets items and bubblegum stuck to his back because he's made of clay.
Yeah.
And he does have the best visual gags because being made of clay means he's literally flexible. So that's okay, I suppose. I like that Chip lives in a chipmunk-sized mansion that has a dog-sized dog in it, which is his pet. That's cute. I cannot think of anything else worth mentioning. I'm looking forward to edit this podcast, guys. Oh boy, I sure am. I did not plan to talk about Rescue Rangers for this long.
Oh boy,
I
this is like me. This is like me, you know.
The more I talked about it, the more I found elements that needed corroboration, and the more I corroborated, the more I had to expand on peripheral elements, and of course I had to properly establish why Who Framed Roger Rabbit is so gosh darn good, and why this one is so gosh darn bad. Because the two elements are correlated.
Yeah.
Oh boy, howdy, this is too much.
Yeah, it's a lot to take in, isn't it?
Oh yes, there is a joke about Polar Express. Mid-2000 CGI characters with dead fish eyes. That joke was spoiled by the trailer, so it's not even worth it to point it out. In fact, all the best jokes were already spoiled by the trailers.
Yay! Which one are you putting at all?
Including the final boss in the third act. That was spoiled too, sadly.
Yay! Why bother watching the film at all?
It's not like I gave Disney any money for it. But don't worry, I'm not actually saying anything meaningful or significant about piracy here. I'm just making random jokes that amount to nothing. It's all parody, folks. Anyway, let's get out of here. I have been Madhog Thy Master, everybody.
And I've been Devar Quiet Arkvaron.
Devar what, Baron?
Quiet Arkvaron.
You didn't have much to say in this
Not really,
episode.
because my feelings on this film were pretty hollow in itself.
No, that's because you didn't even bother to watch it. I watched it for the both of us.
Watched it for two.
I'm like a pregnant woman. I watched it for two. And on that horrible note, good night, everybody.
Good night, take care. And don't give birth to fly rats.
Or, if you really have to, make sure the right people will see them. Namely that weird Russian cult. They will love those kids, let me tell you. Bye. Oh, and by the way, about Disney and copyright infringement, let us never forget. Disney is the company that told a grieving father he cannot theme his child's tombstone to Spider-Man.
Yes,
let us never forget what Disney really is as a company. Let us never, ever forget.